Hi everybody, it's Dr. Barby here, and we are going through a series of videos where I briefly discuss the 10 principles of intuitive eating. If you would like to read more about these principles in detail, I highly suggest you read the Intuitive Eating book by Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole. The link will be below in the description. And they are the two proponents of intuitive eating and the founders of intuitive eating. And so I highly recommend, if you're interested in reading more about the principles of intuitive eating, check out the book because it has a lot more details about all the principles. So last video we discussed principle number 5 of intuitive eating, which is to discover the satisfaction factor. Principle number 6 goes pretty hand in hand with principle number 5. So principle number 6 is to feel your fullness. So we finally made it where you've rejected the diet mentality, you're honoring your hunger, you make peace with food, you're challenging the food police, and you are satisfied with your meals or learning to become satisfied with your meals. So now we're going to finally talk about feeling your fullness. Yes, it took this long to start focusing on fullness because I'm sure you've probably been chronically dieting for years. And so the chronic dieting for years, right? We're not going to break the habit of restriction in just seconds or days. It's going to take a while. And it's going to take a while to take that cycle of diet, fall off the wagon, so to speak, or as it's said in society, and then get back on a diet again. So feeling the fullness really cannot truly happen until you've gone through the previous principles of intuitive eating. Because if you're still on the mindset of restriction, even if you're not restricting your body anymore, you cannot truly know what fullness feels like in your own body. Now, what's very important to know about intuitive eating is that you cannot do intuitive eating wrong. You can't fail at it. It's not a diet, so you can't be bad in intuitive eating. If you haven't been able to honor your fullness thus far, or even moving forward from this principle forward, it does not make you a bad person either. It does not mean you're failing at intuitive eating. You'll have days when you eat past fullness. You'll have days when you eat to satisfaction. You'll have days when you go hungry for hours and for whatever reason you can't reach food on time. And then you'll end up going back to potentially old patterns of overeating. And that's completely normal because the number one cause of binging is prior restriction. So in order to feel your fullness, we have to reject the diet mentality, and then we have to honor our hunger. We have to make peace with food and allow ourselves to eat all the foods that our body asks for. We have to challenge those thoughts in our brain, the food police in our brain, telling us that we should eat this and not that this food is good, that food is bad, etc., etc. And then we also have to learn how to get satisfied from our meals. Once we're able to accomplish all those things, we can actually start feeling whether we are full, satisfied, still hungry. We can decide where we are. So feeling our fullness, principle number 6, can only occur if we've already worked on all the other principles. And that's why it takes this long to reach the feeling your fullness. Now is where we can start telling all those critics about unconditional permission to eat. It doesn't mean eat whatever you want all the time. It means when you are full, you will stop. But first you have to actually honor your hunger and become satisfied with the meal that you had. Only then, and when you've truly rejected the diet mentality and gone through all the other principles, can you start thinking about what does fullness feel like in my body? And there's probably different levels of fullness that you'll feel. So, for example, a level of fullness might be in your stomach. You feel like your belly is a little bit either swollen, bloated, or just right. You might feel like you can't really eat another bite. And if you do, the last bite threshold, if you eat another bite, you're overly stuffed. So you're going to start discovering that last bite threshold within your body and your stomach. That's going to be one of the things that you discovered with feeling your fullness. And before intuitively eating, when you were restricting and having cheap meals or binge days, you probably didn't know how much you could actually eat before becoming full. And the reason is that when you overate, your body was going into that overdrive to be able to overeat because it wasn't sure when it was going to get the nutrition that it wanted and it needed because you were restricting certain foods, whether physically or mentally. So now you will have to learn your own body's cues as to what fullness means to your body. Now, one of them can be in the stomach, like I said. You could also start feeling a little bit dizzy or lightheaded. That can sometimes mean that your sugar levels have reached a satisfying level. It doesn't always mean that, but it could. You could feel that you are tired all of a sudden or fatigued. So there's different sensations that I want you to pay attention to as you try to feel your fullness and try to identify where your fullness lies. And it might vary with the foods that you eat. It might vary with days and with meals, and that's normal because we don't have the exact same routine every single day of the entire year. Some days you might work out, some days you might not. Some days you walked a little bit more, some days you walked a little bit less. Some days you were seated for longer, some days you slept longer. And so it really also varies on your activity, also your mental focus, if you had an exam or if you had a big fight with someone that you love, maybe you're under more stress. So your fullness might vary, and that's why it's important to feel the fullness and not determine or predetermine what the fullness is, which normally you would have done with a diet or some sort of restrictive mentality. When you feel your fullness, you take it day by day, meal by meal, and every meal might be different. Every meal might be the same. But you will start learning these cues about your body that you'll be surprised you don't know about just yet. What I learned, for example, in my journey of intuitive eating and feeling my fullness, I realized that my husband eats about 3 times what I eat. And when I used to feel full, but he was still eating and I still had food in my plate, I would keep eating at the beginning of intuitive eating because I thought that that's what I needed to do because he's eating, so I might as well be eating too. Granted, he's a lot larger than me, so his body requires different energy fuel. And even if he was smaller, his body might require different energies. And so the amount of food that we eat varies person by person. That's also why diets tend to fail because not everyone needs the same amount of food at every given time. Including compared to yourself. Like I was saying, some days you need more, some days you need less. And so for me, I realized that once I was satisfied, once I was full, following principles 5 and 6 of intuitive eating, and my husband was still eating, and most of the people around me were still eating, I would have to push my plate away. And that was one of the cues that I would give myself, that it's okay not to continue eating. Even though everyone else around me is, I am full. If I eat more, I will pass that last bite threshold and feel overly stuffed and uncomfortable, and I don't like that feeling. So, and even to this day, sometimes I still have to remind myself that if I eat one more bite, that's the threshold that I'll cross. But if I stop eating, I know that food will be available later. So I can stop eating right now, and if I'm hungry 30 minutes later, an hour later, etc., I can always go back and eat either what I was eating or eat something new if I'm craving something different. So I still have to remind myself of that fullness because I was chronically dieting and had an eating disorder for so long. I need to remind that fullness is okay and that I don't need to overly stuff my face because I will have food available coming up later. This is one of the principles that I still struggle with because I'm so used to my body thinking that it'll be deprived of food ever since I was a young child. And so I have to remind myself again, if I eat one more bite, I'm not going to feel comfortable for hours, Versus if I stop eating right now, I'm pretty satisfied with my meal. I feel adequately full, and I can always eat more later if I end up being hungry later. And so, principle number 6, feel your fullness. And it's something that takes practice because you're probably not used to listening to your fullness cues. You're just used to listening to predetermined amounts of foods or portions that you can or cannot eat because that's the diet that you chose that week, that month, that year, etc. And so, feeling your fullness, I want you to pay attention to how your body is feeling and how your brain is feeling as you are eating. And then try to discover that last bite threshold. See if you find it. This will also help guide you as to how much do you normally need to cook if you're someone that cooks at home. And you can always overcook and then save it. Like I said, you can always eat it later. I particularly don't like making things and plates dirty. So the more I cook, the more dirt I have to clean up in the kitchen. And so I really liked understanding where that threshold was for me. It also helped me feel my fullness and sit with my fullness for longer versus being understuffed or overstuffed and being just adequately stuffed. And like I said before, you will have days where you're eating past your fullness. You will have days where you're under eating. And that's totally okay. It's part of the process. It's part of intuitive eating. It's part of listening to your body and to your brain and to what they need in terms of fueling your body and giving it the nutrition that it's needing. I hope you found this video helpful and that you have a great day.